The boardroom remained silent as Michael Ross closed his laptop. Outside the floor-to-soiling windows, Seattle's skyline was disappearing beneath a curtain of rain. Inside, 20 years of trust had collapsed in less than an hour. No one spoke, no one dared to. Every executive understood that the next decision would determine the future of Carter Design Group. Michael stood. Ladies and gentlemen, under Article 7 of the Carter Family Preservation Trust, the Emergency Protection Clause has officially been activated. He placed the original trust agreement on the conference table. The company's current restructuring is immediately suspended. The transfer of intellectual property is frozen. North Horizon Development loses all authority over Carter Design Group assets pending judicial review. One board member quietly nodded. Then, Mrs. Carter remains a founding executive. Michael answered without hesitation. She never stopped being one. David slowly lowered himself into his chair. For the first time in decades, he looked exhausted, not defeated by Emily, defeated by his own decisions. He stared at the polished table without saying a word. The chairman of the board finally spoke. "Mr. Carter." David looked up. "Did you forge Mrs. Carter's approval?" A long silence followed. Everyone waited. Finally, David nodded once. "Yes." No excuses. No explanations, just one word. "Yes." Several directors closed their eyes. Linda quietly wiped away a tear. She had worked beside David for nearly 20 years. She never imagined hearing him admit to fraud. The chairman continued. "Did you authorize the transfer of company assets without board approval?" David answered even more quietly. "Yes." "And did you intentionally conceal these actions from Mrs. Carter?" Another pause. Yes, the room felt impossibly heavy. The truth no longer needed to be investigated. David had confessed. The chairman looked toward the other directors. "I believe we have enough information." One after another, they nodded. A formal vote began. Every director raised a hand. The decision was unanimous. Michael read the resolution aloud. "Effective immediately, David Carter is removed from all executive responsibilities pending legal proceedings. The board appoints Emily Carter as interim chief executive officer." No applause followed. There was nothing to celebrate, only consequences. Slowly stood. No one tried to stop him. He walked toward Emily. For a moment, they simply looked at one another. 26 years. Thousands of shared mornings, family vacations, late-night conversations, business victories, dreams. Everything now stood between them like invisible glass. David finally spoke. "I'm sorry." Emily listened quietly. He continued. "I kept telling myself I was saving the company." His voice cracked. "But somewhere, I stopped saving us." Emily nodded. "I know you hate me." She shook her head gently. "No, I mourn the man you used to be." Those words hurt David more than anger ever could. He looked toward Sophie. "I'm sorry I involved you." Sophie wiped away tears. "I should have asked more questions." "No." David shook his head. "You trusted the wrong person. I made sure of that." Weeks later, autumn settled over Seattle. The investigation confirmed everything Michael had revealed. Every forged authorization was overturned. Every illegal transfer was reversed. North Horizon Development was dissolved by court order. The company's employees kept their jobs. Clients remained. Procs continued. The business survived. David accepted a plea agreement. Rather than spending years fighting in court, he admitted responsibility for fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. His professional licenses were revoked. His reputation, carefully built over decades, disappeared almost overnight. He left Seattle shortly after the case ended. Emily never saw him again. Sophie remained with the company, but not as an executive. She voluntarily testified during the investigation and cooperated fully with authorities. Over time, Emily recognized the difference between someone who had made a terrible mistake and someone who had deliberately chosen betrayal. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but honesty became the first brick. Years later, Sophie would become one of the company's most respected project managers, not because Emily forgot the past, but because both women chose accountability over bitterness. One crisp October morning, Emily unlocked the front door of Carter Design Group before anyone else arrived. The building was quiet. She walked into the executive office she had helped design 26 years earlier. The hidden safe behind the bookshelf had been removed. The forged documents were gone. The company logo remained. She smiled softly, not because everything had returned to normal, because it never would. Instead, everything had become truthful. On her desk sat a small wooden box that Michael had delivered after the legal proceedings ended. Inside was the silver key William Carter had once kept. Beneath it lay a handwritten note. Emily unfolded the yellowed paper. William's familiar handwriting filled the page. "If you're reading this, it means my greatest fear came true. A family can survive failure. It can survive poverty. It can even survive loss. But it cannot survive dishonesty. Protect the people before the profits. Build character before buildings. And remember, the strongest foundation is always trust." Emily gently folded the letter. She looked out across the office where dozens of employees were beginning another workday, For the first time in months, she felt at peace, not because she had won, but because the truth had. No one moved. The recording had shattered every explanation David could have offered. The conference room, once prepared for applause and celebration, now felt more like a courtroom waiting for its final witness. Emily looked across the table at the man she had loved for 26 years. His expensive suit, his perfectly knotted tie, his calm executive demeanor. For years she had admired those qualities. Now they looked like part of a carefully rehearsed performance. Michael placed another folder onto the conference table. I said the recording wasn't the strongest evidence. He rested one hand on the folder. Because evidence can be challenged. He looked directly at David. But facts are much harder to deny. David's voice was barely above a whisper. Michael, don't. Michael opened the folder. Inside were certified bank records, transfer confirmations, corporate filings, notarized statements. Everything had official seals. Nothing could be dismissed as speculation. He handed copies to every board member. The transfers began 4 months ago. The total value exceeds $32 million. Several directors gasped. One nearly dropped the papers. $32 million? Michael nodded. Transferred in stages to avoid attracting attention. Another director flipped through the pages. These authorizations, they all contain Mrs. Carter's electronic approval. Emily frowned. I never approved any of them. You didn't, Michael answered calmly. They were generated using an executive security token. Emily looked confused. What token? Linda suddenly spoke. The encrypted authorization key. Everyone turned toward her. It's issued only to executive partners. Emily nodded slowly. I remember, when I retired from daily operations, mine stayed locked inside the executive security safe. Linda swallowed. It disappeared 3 months ago. Every eye shifted toward David. He didn't deny it. He simply stared at the table. Michael continued. The security logs tell the rest of the story. He produced another document. The authorization key assigned to Mrs. Carter was activated 12 separate times. Emily quietly asked, "From where?" Mike answered, "Mr. Carter's office." The room fell silent once again. David suddenly stood. Enough, his voice echoed across the conference room. I did what had to be done. Emily looked up. What had to be done? The company was dying. No, it was slowing down. You stopped taking risks. You stopped thinking like a founder. Emily remained calm. I stopped gambling with people's lives. David shook his head. You became emotional. I became careful. You became weak. Emily's expression didn't change. If protecting our employees makes me weak, I'll accept that. David walked slowly toward the windows overlooking downtown Seattle. I spent years building opportunities. No bank believed in us. No investors trusted us. I carried this company. Emily quietly interrupted. You carried it because I carried you. David turned. His face hardened. You don't understand. No. She stepped closer. I understand perfectly. You didn't want a partner anymore. You wanted complete control. David laughed bitterly. Control? You think this was about control? It was about survival. Emily answered softly. Then why hide everything? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out because he had no answer. At that moment Sophie slowly stood from her chair. Everyone looked toward her. She was trembling. I need to say something. David immediately shook his head. Sophie, sit down. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her handbag. She removed a small silver flash drive. Emily recognized it instantly. It was attached to a tiny silver keychain, the same silver key David had carried for months. Sophie placed the flash drive in front of Michael. I copied everything. David's face turned white. I couldn't keep lying. Michael looked at her. What's on it? She took a deep breath. Every email, every contract, every financial spreadsheet, every meeting note, every revised signature. She looked directly at Emily. I started saving them after I realized your name kept disappearing from documents. Emily said nothing. Sophie continued. I thought if something went wrong, someone would need the truth. Michael plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The room waited in complete silence. Folders appeared on the screen, hundreds of them. Bide minutes, transfer orders, corporate emails, tenal memos, financial approvals. Then one folder caught Michael's attention. Its name consisted of only 3 words. September 22 plan. Emily felt her heartbeat accelerate. Michael opened it. Inside were dozens of files, timelines, checklists, legal drafts, corporate announcements, everything prepared weeks in advance. The final document was titled, Post-Anniversary Transition. Michael opened it. The first sentence appeared on the projector screen. Following the anniversary dinner, Emily Carter will formally announce her retirement from Carter Design Group and transfer all remaining public responsibilities to David Carter. The room erupted. She never agreed to that. This was already written? When was this created? Michael checked the metadata. His eyes narrowed. He looked toward David. This document was written 43 days ago. 43 days. Long before Emily had any reason to suspect something was wrong. Long before David had smiled across the dinner table. Long before he had brought Sophie into their home. The betrayal hadn't begun recently. It had been planned for weeks, perhaps months. Emily slowly closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there were no tears, only clarity. She looked directly at David. I don't hate you. Her voice was calm. I simply don't know who you are anymore. David lowered his head, for the first time since this confrontation began. He had nothing left to say. Then Michael quietly closed the laptop and looked toward the board of directors. There is only one matter remaining, the final ownership determination. Every director slowly turned toward him. Emily took a slow breath. Whatever happened next would decide not only the future of the company, but the future of the Carter family itself. No one spoke. The silence inside the conference room felt almost physical, pressing down on everyone seated around the long oak table. Emily kept staring at the trust agreement. 21 years. For 21 years, this document had existed without her knowledge. William Carter had seen something long before anyone else had. He had prepared for the possibility that one day his own son might place ambition above family. Emily slowly closed the folder. She wasn't angry anymore. She wanted answers. David broke the silence. This trust shouldn't even exist. Michael looked at him calmly. It exists. It was never supposed to be activated. Michael nodded. I agree, but someone triggered it. David's jaw tightened. Emily could almost see him calculating every possible escape. There weren't many left. One of the independent board directors cleared his throat. Mr. Ross, what exactly happens if the trust is activated? Michael folded his hands. The company immediately enters a legal protection period. Another director frowned. What does that mean? It means no assets may be transferred, no executive authority may be reassigned, no ownership percentages may be altered, and every transaction completed after the triggering event becomes subject to judicial review. The room exploded into whispers. Linda quietly closed her eyes. She had suspected something illegal. She hadn't imagined it could be this serious. David slammed his hand against the conference table. This is ridiculous. Michael didn't even flinch. Is it? The company needed restructuring. Michael answered. Then you should have followed the law. I built this company. Emily finally looked directly at him. No, we built it. David's expression softened for just a moment, then hardened again. Emily stood. I have one question. David looked at her. When did you decide I was no longer your partner? The room fell silent once more. David looked away. He couldn't answer. Emily nodded slowly. I think that tells everyone everything they need to know. Just then, one of the board members spoke. Michael turned toward him. What is it? If the trust activated months ago, why are we only hearing about it today? Several people nodded. It was the question everyone had been thinking. Michael took a slow breath. Because I wasn't certain. Certain of what? Whether this was a misunderstanding or an intentional deception. He looked directly at David. Last week, I received documents requesting final approval for transferring nearly all of Carter Design Group's intellectual property to North Horizon Development. Emily's eyes widened. The company's designs, its patents, its client database, everything that made the business valuable. David hadn't just planned to restructure the company, he had planned to move its entire future into another corporation. Emily turned toward Sophie. For the first time, Sophie looked genuinely uncomfortable. Emily spoke quietly. Did you know? Sophie hesitated. David interrupted. Leave her out of this. Emily ignored him. I'm asking Sophie. The young woman looked down. When I joined the company, I believed North Horizon was simply a new development division. Emily waited. No one told me everything. Michael watched her carefully. Everything. Sophie swallowed. I didn't know Mrs. Carter had been excluded. I didn't know her signature had been removed. I didn't know about the trust. Her voice began to shake. I only discovered those things recently. Emily studied her face for the first time since they met. Sophie wasn't speaking like a confident executive. She sounded frightened. David stepped toward her. Stop talking. Sophie looked at him. I can't. You don't understand. No. She shook her head slowly. I understand now. David lowered his voice. Sophie, she took a step backward. You told me Emily wanted to retire. You said she'd approved everything. You said this was her decision. The conference room became silent again. Emily stared at David. Another lie, another carefully constructed story. Linda quietly whispered, My God. Several executives looked visibly shocked. One board member removed his glasses. Another began taking handwritten notes. The atmosphere had completely changed. This was no longer a corporate announcement. It was becoming an investigation. Michael reached into his briefcase once more. I believe there's one final item everyone should hear. David closed his eyes. You've done enough. Michael ignored him. Instead, he placed a small digital voice recorder on the conference table. Emily frowned. What is that? Michael answered. A recording. David's face turned pale. No. Michael looked at him. It was made legally. You can't play it. I can. It concerns corporate governance. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. A recording of what? Michael pressed the play button, filled the room. Then David's voice emerged clearly. Emily doesn't need to know. A second voice answered Sophie. Are you sure? David replied calmly. By the time she finds out, the company will already belong to North Horizon. Silence, then David continued. Once the anniversary dinner is over, everything will be finished. The recording stopped. No one spoke. Emily felt every emotion inside her collide at once. The anniversary dinner, it had never been a celebration. It had been the final step in David's plan. She slowly looked toward him. For the first time in 26 years, she no longer saw the man she had married. She saw a stranger, and just as the weight of that realization settled over the room, Michael quietly said one final sentence. Unfortunately for Mr. Carter, that recording isn't the strongest piece of evidence. Emily turned toward him. If that's not the strongest, then what is? The conference room remained silent. No one moved. No one even reached for a glass of water. Every eye was fixed on Michael Ross. For over 20 years, Michael had been more than the Carter family's attorney. He had witnessed every major milestone in their lives: the incorporation of Carter Design Group, the purchase of their home, their wills, their trusts, and every significant legal agreement that followed if anyone knew the truth. It was him. David recovered first. "Michael," he said, forcing a smile, "this isn't the appropriate time." Michael calmly closed the conference room door behind him. "I disagree." He placed his leather briefcase on the conference table. "In fact, this is probably the only appropriate time." Emily watched David carefully. Her husband wasn't angry. He was nervous. That frightened her more than anything else. Michael slowly removed several thick folders from his briefcase. "I believe everyone here deserves complete transparency." One of the board members cleared his throat. "What exactly is this about?" Michael answered without hesitation. "Corporate governance." Another director frowned. "We were told today's restructuring had already been legally approved." Michael looked directly at David. "Were you?" David remained silent. Michael opened the first folder. "I prepared several of these documents years ago." He carefully placed an original contract on the table. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Emily immediately recognized the signatures: hers, David's, Michael's, and the company seal. "This agreement," Michael said, "was signed 21 years ago when Carter Design Group accepted its first institutional investors." Several executives leaned forward. Michael continued. "It contains one clause that has never been amended." David interrupted sharply. "That clause is no longer relevant." Michael ignored him. "It states that any transfer of executive authority, ownership, restructuring, or creation of an affiliated company involving Carter Design Group requires the written consent of both founding partners." Emily felt her heart pounding. "Both founding partners," she whispered. "And me." Michael nodded. "Exactly." The room erupted into whispers. Several board members immediately began reviewing the copies Michael distributed. One director looked up. "Mrs. Carter's signature isn't here," Michael answered calmly. "No." Another director turned toward David. "Did she approve North Horizon Development?" David hesitated. "The situation is more complicated." Michael replied, "No, it isn't." Emily finally spoke. "Then every document created without my approval." Michael finished her sentence. "May be legally unenforceable." The room fell silent again. David stepped forward. "You don't understand the entire situation." Emily looked at him. "Then explain it." He rubbed his forehead. "We needed flexibility." "For what?" "The company was growing, so you removed me." "It wasn't personal." Emily almost laughed. "Not personal. You erased me from the company we built together." David's voice rose. "I was protecting the business," Emily answered quietly. "No, you were protecting yourself." Sophie finally stood. "I think we're losing focus." Everyone turned toward her. She remained remarkably composed. "The restructuring wasn't intended to hurt anyone." Emily studied her carefully. "Then why hide it?" Sophie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward David, a brief glance, almost imperceptible. Emily noticed so did Michael. Michael reached into his briefcase again. "I have one more document." David suddenly stepped forward. "Don't." Michael paused. "Don't?" David's voice became firmer. "That document is confidential." Michael slowly smiled. It was. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. "But confidentiality ends when fraud begins." The atmosphere changed instantly. Several executives exchanged worried looks. Even Linda looked pale. Emily stared at the envelope. "What is it?" Michael answered carefully. "It's the reason I asked everyone to stay." He slid the envelope toward Emily. "I believe you should open it." Emily hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a certified copy of a trust agreement. She unfolded the first page. At the top appeared the title, "The Carter Family Preservation Trust." She frowned. "I've never seen this. You weren't supposed to." David closed his eyes. Emily continued reading. Halfway down the first page, one sentence caught her attention. Her breathing stopped. "Primary beneficiary, Emily Carter." She looked up. "What is this?" Michael answered. "A trust established 21 years ago." Emily frowned. "By whom?" Michael looked directly at David. "Not by him." The room became perfectly silent. Emily slowly turned the page. Near the bottom appeared another signature, one she recognized instantly. Her father-in-law, William Carter, David's late father, the man who had founded the original architectural firm decades before David expanded it. Emily whispered, "William created this?" Michael nodded. 3 months before he died. Emily could barely process the words. William had always treated her like a daughter, but he had never mentioned any trust. Never, Michael continued. Your father-in-law feared that one day emotions, ambition, or outside influences might divide this family. Emily looked toward David. His face had become completely expressionless. So he created legal protections. Emily lowered her eyes back to the document. What kind of protections? Michael answered slowly. The kind that activate only if one founding partner attempts to remove the other without consent. Every executive in the room froze. David whispered, Michael, don't. Michael's voice remained calm. It's too late. Emily stared at the final page of the trust agreement. There, beneath dozens of legal clauses, one final paragraph had been highlighted. She read it once, then again. She looked up at Michael in disbelief. If this is true, then David never actually gained control of the company. Michael nodded. No, he only believed he did. Across the room, David's hands slowly curled into fists. For the first time since Emily had known him, he looked like a man realizing that every move he'd carefully planned for months might have already failed before it even began. Emily barely slept after discovering David's notebook. She kept staring at the date written on the final page. September 22, their wedding anniversary. Only 3 days away. For weeks, she had imagined celebrating 26 years of marriage. Now it looked as though David had marked the same day for an entirely different reason. Whatever he was planning, it was almost ready. The following morning, David seemed unusually cheerful. He whistled while making coffee. You should come to the office this afternoon, he said casually. Emily looked up from her newspaper. Oh, we're announcing something important. What kind of announcement? David smiled. You'll see. He kissed her forehead before leaving. I think you'll be proud. Emily watched the front door close. For the first time in years, she no longer believed a word he said. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Emily arrived at Carter Design Group. The lobby buzzed with excitement. Employees hurried between conference rooms carrying presentation boards and catering trays. Large banners displayed the company logo beside a new slogan, Building Tomorrow Together. Emily noticed another logo underneath, North Horizon Development. Her stomach tightened. No one had told her the two companies were appearing together. Linda hurried toward her. You came. I had to. Linda looked nervous. The board meeting starts in 15 minutes. Who's attending? The entire executive team. And me? Linda hesitated. I don't know. Emily frowned. What do you mean? They never sent you an invitation. Emily's heart sank. She wasn't just being excluded, she was being erased. She walked toward the executive conference room anyway. Just before she reached the doors, Sophie appeared. She looked elegant in a navy business suit, carrying a leather portfolio. Mrs. Carter, her smile was flawless. I didn't expect to see you today. Emily returned the smile. I'm still one of the owners. Of course. Sophie stepped aside politely. But today's meeting is limited to executive management. Emily held her gaze. I founded this company. I know. You've done remarkable things. Emily noticed the wording. You've done. Past tense, as though her role already belonged to history. Before either woman could speak again, the conference room doors opened. David walked out. Emily. His smile faded slightly. I wasn't expecting you. I gathered that. He glanced toward Sophie before lowering his voice. We should talk later. No, Emily folded her arms. We'll talk now. Several employees slowed their pace, pretending not to listen. David noticed. This isn't the place. It became the place the moment you stopped telling me the truth. Silence settled across the hallway. David sighed. Come inside. The conference room fell quiet as Emily entered. Nearly 20 executives looked toward her. Some smiled awkwardly. Others avoided eye contact entirely. At the front of the room stood a large presentation screen. The first slide displayed Strategic Integration Plan. Below it, the North Horizon logo. David stepped onto the stage. Thank you everyone for coming. He began speaking with practiced confidence. For the past several months, we've been preparing the most significant transformation in our company's history. Emily listened without moving. Our future depends on faster decision-making, stronger leadership, and a more flexible corporate structure. The next slide appeared, a new organizational chart. Emily searched for her own name. She couldn't find it. Instead, beneath David's position appeared another title, Chief Executive Operations. Sophie Bennett. The room applauded. Emily felt her pulse pound in her ears. David continued. As part of this transition, ownership responsibilities have been reorganized. A legal document appeared on the screen. Emily recognized the formatting immediately. Corporate restructuring paperwork. David smiled toward the audience. Effective immediately, Emily Carter has retired from all executive responsibilities. Silence. Emily stared at the screen. Retired? She had never signed retirement papers, never submitted a resignation, never approved any restructuring. David continued speaking as though reading from a prepared script. We're grateful for everything Emily has contributed over the past 26 years. Several employees applauded politely. Others looked uncomfortable. Emily stood. I have a question. The applause stopped instantly. David forced a smile. Of course. When exactly did I retire? The room became perfectly silent. David hesitated. We discussed it. No, we agreed it would happen eventually. Emily looked directly into his eyes. I asked a very simple question. She took a step forward. When I retire. David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Emily turned toward the executives. I never resigned. She looked around the room. I never approved any restructuring. Another step. I never surrendered my authority. She reached the front of the room, and I certainly never agreed to be replaced. Every pair of eyes shifted between husband and wife. David's expression hardened. This discussion is inappropriate. Emily ignored him. Instead, she pulled a single document from her handbag, the notarized declaration bearing her forged signature. She held it high enough for everyone to see. Would anyone here like to explain why this document contains a signature I never wrote? Gasps echoed across the room. Board members leaned forward. Several executives exchanged stunned looks. Even Sophie lost her composure for the first time. David stepped off the stage. Emily, lower your voice. She looked at him calmly. I've spent 26 years protecting this company. Her voice remained steady. You've spent the last few months hiding it from me. David reached for the paper. Emily pulled it away. Don't. The room had become so quiet that no one dared breathe. Then, from the back of the conference room, a deep voice broke the silence. Mrs. Carter is asking the right question. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Michael Ross, the family's longtime attorney. He carried a thick leather briefcase and wore the same composed expression Emily had known for more than 2 decades. His eyes met hers for only a second. Then he looked directly at David. I think it's finally time we discuss the agreement everyone seems to have forgotten. David's face lost every trace of color. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked genuinely afraid. The drive home felt longer than usual. Seattle's gray skies blurred through the rain-soaked windshield. But Emily barely noticed the traffic around her. Her mind replayed the documents over and over again. North Horizon Development LLC registered to her own home, managed by David, operated by Sophie. How could someone register a company using their family home without telling the co-owner of the property? She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep her in the dark. That evening, David arrived home shortly after 7. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. Smells wonderful, he said as he hung his coat near the front door. Emily smiled while stirring a pot of soup. I made your favorite. He kissed her forehead. For a second I thought you were still upset. She looked at him. Should I be? David laughed. I don't know. Neither of them mentioned Sophie. Neither of them mentioned the company. Dinner passed almost normally. Almost. David kept checking his phone beneath the table. Every few minutes the screen lit up. He always turned it away before Emily could see. She pretended not to notice. Later that night, after David had fallen asleep, Emily quietly slipped out of bed. She carried the copied documents downstairs into David's study. Moonlight filtered through the windows. She spread every page across the large oak desk. Company registrations, pre-records, financial summaries, wire transfers. Most of it looked ordinary. Until she noticed something unusual. Every major transfer had been approved on the same day each month, the 15th. Always the 15th. The amounts were different, but the dates never changed. That wasn't random, it was a schedule. Emily opened her laptop. She searched the Washington State Business Registry. Within seconds, North Horizon Development appeared. Active. Formation date, 4 months earlier. Registered agent, Michael Ross Legal Services. Emily froze. Michael Ross, their family attorney, the same man who had helped them write their wills. The same lawyer who had attended every major business transaction for over 20 years. Why was his law firm listed? Was he helping David or simply performing legal paperwork? She couldn't tell. She continued searching. Another document caught her attention. An annual filing. The ownership percentages were listed. David Carter, 51%. Sophie Bennett, 19%. Remaining shares held by an investment trust. Emily leaned closer. An investment trust? She searched its name. Nothing. No website. No public records. Only a registration number. Whoever controlled that trust owned nearly 30% of the company. Someone was hiding behind it. The next morning, Emily drove to the county property office. She requested copies of public property filings connected to her address. The clerk disappeared for several minutes before returning with a stack of documents. Anything else? The woman asked. Emily shook her head. No, thank you. She carried everything to a nearby coffee shop. One by one, she examined each page. Building permits, tax records, insurance documents, then a notarized declaration dated 3 months earlier. She frowned. The signature at the bottom looked like hers. But something was wrong. Very wrong. She had never signed this document. Her signature had been copied almost perfectly. Almost. Only one tiny detail exposed it. Emily always wrote the final letter in her last name with a slight upward curve. This signature ended perfectly straight. Most people would never notice. She did immediately. Someone had forged her signature. Her breathing became uneven. Forgery, illegal company registration, financial transfers. revoked executive authority. None of this could be explained away as a misunderstanding. As she left the coffee shop, her phone rang. The caller ID surprised her. Linda Morales. Emily answered immediately. Linda? Her voice sounded nervous. We need to talk. What happened? I can't explain over the phone. Emily glanced around the parking lot. Are you all right? No. Linda lowered her voice. I think someone knows I gave you those documents. Emily's heart skipped. What do you mean? My office computer was searched this morning. Emily stopped walking. What? Someone copied my hard drive. Who? I don't know. But after David left for a meeting, Linda hesitated. Sophie came into my office. Emily remained silent. Linda continued. She smiled. Then she asked me whether I'd spoken with you recently. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. What did you say? I lied. And Linda swallowed. She looked at me for several seconds. Then she said something I'll never forget. Emily's fingers tightened around the phone. What did she say? Linda whispered. Mrs. Carter always finds out the truth eventually. Emily felt every hair on her arms stand up. Eventually. Not if eventually. How could Sophie possibly know what Emily was investigating? Unless she wasn't just helping David, she was already watching Emily. That evening, Emily returned home earlier than usual. The house was silent. David was still at work. She walked into his study. For the first time, she examined every shelf with absolute determination. Awards, photo albums, architectural models. Everything looked ordinary until she noticed something hidden behind a row of old design binders. A slim black notebook. No title, no label. She opened it. Inside were handwritten dates, meeting schedules, bank references, account numbers, and on the very last page, one sentence written in David's unmistakable handwriting. Everything must be completed before September 22. Emily stared at the date. September 22, their wedding anniversary, the same anniversary she had spent weeks planning to celebrate. Instead, it appeared to be someone's deadline. She slowly closed the notebook. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emily stopped asking whether David was betraying her. Now she had a far more frightening question. What exactly was supposed to happen on September 22? Emily had spent 26 years believing that trust was the foundation of a marriage. Now she realized something else. Trust wasn't destroyed the moment someone lied. It disappeared the moment you began searching for proof. David left early the next morning. He kissed her goodbye as he always had. Don't wait up tonight, he said while adjusting his tie. The board meeting may run late. Emily smiled. I won't. The front door closed. She waited exactly 30 seconds before walking to the front window. David's SUV pulled away from the driveway. Only after it disappeared around the corner did she let the smile fade. For the first time in her life, she intended to investigate her own husband. Emily drove to Carter Design Group just before noon. Although she had stepped away from daily operations years earlier, she still owned 40% of the company. Every employee knew her as one of its founders. The receptionist greeted her warmly. Mrs. Carter, we haven't seen you in weeks. Emily smiled naturally. I thought I'd surprise everyone. She rode the elevator to the executive floor. The atmosphere felt different. People stopped talking when she walked past. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. A few offered polite smiles before returning to their computers. Something had changed. She could feel it. David's office door was open. He wasn't there. Emily stepped inside. The room looked exactly as she remembered. Modern furniture, family photographs, architectural awards lining the shelves. One picture caught her attention. It had been taken 10 years earlier when the company opened its second office. David stood beside her, both of them holding oversized ceremonial scissors. Back then, every major decision had been theirs together. Now, she wasn't even informed about a new office opening. She walked around the office slowly. Nothing appeared unusual until she reached the bookshelf. A small bronze sculpture sat slightly crooked. David hated crooked decorations. Emily straightened it. Click, a faint mechanical sound came from behind the bookshelf. She frowned. Carefully pulling the shelf aside, she discovered a narrow hidden compartment. Inside sat a small digital safe. Her heart skipped. David had never mentioned installing a safe. She entered the only code she could think of. Their wedding anniversary, 922 error. She tried the company's founding date. Nothing, she sighed. Of course. She pushed the shelf back into place. Whatever was inside, David clearly didn't want her to see it. As she turned to leave, someone knocked softly on the open door. Mrs. Carter? Emily looked up. It was Linda Morales, the company's finance director. Linda had worked with them for nearly 20 years. She looked uneasy. I didn't know you were here. I was just visiting. Linda hesitated. There have been changes. Emily watched her carefully. What kind of changes? Linda glanced into the hallway before quietly closing the office door. I probably shouldn't say anything. Emily stepped closer. If something affects this company, I deserve to know. Linda lowered her voice. About 6 months ago, David started approving transfers that bypassed our normal financial process. Emily frowned. What transfers? Wasn't full access? Who was? Linda hesitated again. Sophie. Emily blinked. Sophie. Linda nodded. David gave her executive financial clearance. Emily stared in disbelief. Executive clearance? Only 4 people have ever had that level of authorization, Emily whispered. I was one of them. Linda nodded sadly. You were. Linda looked down. Your authorization was removed 3 months ago. Emily felt as though the floor shifted beneath her. Removed? I assumed David had discussed it with you. No, I'm so sorry. Emily could barely hear the rest of the conversation, her executive access gone, without her knowledge, without her signature, without even a conversation. How was that possible? She thanked Linda and left the office. Instead of going home, she walked toward the accounting department. An employee she recognized smiled. Mrs. Carter, could you print something for me? Of course. I'd like a copy of the current shareholder report. The young accountant hesitated. I can't. Why not? It requires executive approval. Emily smiled patiently. I am an owner. He looked uncomfortable. The system won't let me. Emily watched him type. A red notification appeared on the monitor. XS denedid ducer F40. Reviewed. Emily felt every drop of blood drain from her face. The computer no longer recognized her. She left the building in silence. Rain had begun falling across downtown Seattle. She sat inside her car for nearly 15 minutes without starting the engine. Her phone vibrated. David. She ignored it. Another message appeared. Dave, how was your day? Emily looked at the screen. For years, she would have answered immediately. Instead, she placed the phone face down. On Ambrose. On the passenger seat lay an envelope Linda had quietly slipped into her handbag before she left. You didn't get this from me, Linda had whispered. Emily hadn't opened it yet. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside were copies of several financial summaries. Most looked ordinary, until she reached the final page. A company name she had never seen before appeared in bold letters. North Horizon Development LLC, registered 4 months earlier. Managing Director, David Carter. Executive Operations Manager, Sophie Bennett. Emily frowned. The company address looked strangely familiar. She stared at it again. Then her eyes widened. It wasn't an office building. It wasn't a commercial property. It was her home address. The house she and David had built together 20 years ago had somehow become the registered headquarters of a company she had never heard of. And according to the documents in her hands, the 2 people running that company were her husband and his new assistant. Emily slowly closed the folder. Outside, the rain continued falling against the windshield. Inside the car, one thought echoed louder than every other. This wasn't just an affair, this was a plan. Emily stood frozen in the upstairs hallway, her fingers tightening around the polished wooden railing. Sophie didn't hesitate. She stepped into the master bedroom as naturally as someone returning to a familiar place. For a split second, Emily wondered if she had somehow misunderstood David's request. Perhaps the blue presentation folder was kept in the upstairs office. Perhaps Sophie had simply opened the wrong door. Emily waited, but Sophie didn't immediately step back out. Instead, she disappeared completely inside the bedroom. Emily's pulse quickened. She walked toward the doorway, forcing herself to remain calm. When she reached the entrance, she stopped. Sophie was standing beside David's antique walnut desk, calmly looking around the room. This room is beautiful, she said without turning around. Emily answered carefully. It has been our bedroom since we moved here. Sophie smiled politely. I can tell. Emily frowned. What do you mean? Oh, Sophie looked slightly embarrassed. I just mean it feels lived in. Emily studied her face. There was no panic, no awkwardness, no embarrassment about accidentally entering the wrong room. Instead, Sophie looked perfectly comfortable. David suddenly appeared in the hallway carrying his phone. There you are. He walked into the bedroom without noticing Emily's expression. The blue folder should be inside the cabinet. Sophie nodded immediately. The second drawer, David answered before thinking. Exactly. Emily slowly turned toward him. The second drawer. David froze. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, then he forced a laugh. I must have mentioned it at work. Sophie quickly added, we've been organizing documents for the board meeting. Emily said nothing. David walked to the cabinet himself. He opened the second drawer. Inside were dozens of neatly arranged folders. Without searching, Sophie reached past several files and picked up a single blue folder. This one? David smiled. Perfect. Emily felt another wave of unease. The cabinet contained at least 30 folders, yet Sophie had selected the correct one instantly. Not after searching, not after reading labels. Immediately, as if she'd done it before. Later that evening, Sophie thanked them for dinner and left. Emily stood at the front window, watching the black SUV disappear down the street. David loosened his tie. You've been quiet. I'm tired. You didn't seem to like Sophie. Emily turned toward him. I barely know her. She's talented. I'm sure she is. David sighed. I wish you'd give her a chance. Emily looked into his eyes. I'd love to. Then what's wrong? She hesitated. How did she know where our bedroom was? David blinked. What? She walked upstairs without asking. She opened the correct door. David shrugged. Maybe she guessed. Emily laughed softly. There are 6 doors upstairs. People guess. She also knew the second drawer. David's smile faded slightly. Emily, you're reading too much into this, am I? He walked into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. You've always trusted your instincts, Emily continued quietly. Trust mine this time. David placed the glass on the counter a little harder than intended. There is nothing going on. I didn't say there was, but you're thinking it. Emily remained silent. David rubbed his forehead. Sophie's just my assistant. I hope you're right. Hongramos. That night Emily couldn't sleep. David fell asleep within minutes. His breathing became slow and steady. Emily stared at the ceiling. 26 years. 26 years of marriage had taught her something. People lied with words, but their habits told the truth. David had changed. He smiled differently. He guarded his phone. He worked later. He canceled family dinners. He took more business trips. None of those things alone proved anything. Together, they formed a pattern. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, David's phone vibrated on the nightstand. Emily wasn't trying to spy. She simply glanced toward the light. The screen illuminated the dark room. A message appeared. Sophie, everything is ready for tomorrow. Don't worry, she still doesn't know. Emily's heart stopped before she could read another word. David woke up. He grabbed the phone immediately. Too quickly, he looked toward Emily. You awake? She closed her eyes. No. He remained still for several seconds before quietly leaving the bedroom. Emily waited. The bedroom door clicked shut. She counted to 20, then slipped out of bed barefoot. She walked silently down the hallway. A faint light glowed beneath the study door. David's voice drifted through the silence. No, not yet. A pause. I said she's starting to notice. Another pause. We have to move faster. Emily's breathing became shallow. She leaned slightly closer. I'll take care of the paperwork tomorrow. Silence. Then David laughed softly. No, I'll keep her distracted. Emily stepped backward. Her legs suddenly felt weak. Distracted? Paperwork? She still doesn't know. None of it made sense, yet every sentence tightened the knot in her stomach. She quietly returned to the bedroom before David could see her. Lying in bed, she stared into the darkness until sunrise. For the first time in her marriage, Emily wasn't afraid that her husband might be having an affair. She was afraid that whatever he was hiding was far bigger than another woman. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered a question she wasn't ready to answer. What if Sophie wasn't the real threat? Emily Carter had always believed that the strongest marriages didn't collapse overnight. They cracked slowly, almost silently, until one ordinary moment exposed every fracture hidden beneath the surface. On a cool September afternoon in Seattle, she stood in the kitchen arranging fresh flowers for the dinner table, while the scent of rosemary chicken drifted through the house. Their 26th wedding anniversary was only 4 days away. She had planned a quiet evening with David, just the two of them, something they hadn't done in months. Their home reflected everything they had built together. Every painting on the walls had been chosen as a couple. Every piece of furniture carried a memory. Even the architecture of the house had been designed by David during the early years of their company, when they still worked side by side and dreamed about growing old together. Emily smiled as she looked around. This house has survived every storm, she whispered to herself. She hoped their marriage had too. Her phone vibrated. David, running a little late. I have someone I'd like you to meet. She frowned. Someone? David rarely brought employees home without warning. Before she could reply, headlights swept across the front windows. The black SUV rolled into the driveway. Emily wiped her hands on a towel and walked toward the front door with the warm smile she'd worn for decades whenever David came home. The front door opened. David entered first, looking unusually energetic despite the late hour. Behind him stood a young woman. She couldn't have been older than 27. She wore an elegant beige business dress beneath a fitted camel-colored coat. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, and she carried an expensive leather laptop bag. She looked perfectly composed, almost too composed. David smiled. Emily. He kissed her briefly on the cheek. I'd like you to meet Sophie Bennett. Emily extended her hand politely. It's nice to meet you. Sophie smiled warmly. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Carter. David has spoken so highly of you. Emily noticed something strange. She had called him David. Not Mr. Carter. Not Mr. Carter, sir. David. Perhaps that was normal in modern workplaces. Still, it felt unusually familiar. David placed a hand lightly on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie's our new executive assistant. Emily nodded. Oh, she's been helping reorganize the executive offices. David sounded proud. Honestly, she's accomplished more in 3 weeks than some employees have managed in 3 years. Sophie laughed softly. I've just been trying to make everyone's life easier. Emily smiled politely again, but something inside her tightened. David almost never praised anyone that enthusiastically, especially not in front of her. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Emily served the meal while David enthusiastically described upcoming projects. Sophie listened carefully, occasionally finishing David's sentences. before he did. Emily noticed so did David. Neither of them seemed embarrassed. At one point David reached across the table. Without thinking, he brushed a tiny speck of dust from Sophie's sleeve. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but Emily had never seen him make such a gentle gesture toward another woman. Not in 26 years. She quietly lowered her eyes to her plate. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe she was simply becoming insecure with age. Conversation continued. Sophie spoke confidently about company restructuring. She knew details Emily herself had never heard. Budgets, investments, expansion plans, even future office locations. Emily looked toward David. When were you planning to tell me about opening another office? David hesitated. Oh, it isn't finalized yet. Sophie immediately looked down at her plate. I'm sorry, I thought. No, it's fine, David interrupted quickly. We've just been very busy. Emily forced another smile. Bussy. That word had become David's answer to everything lately. Buzzy enough to skip family dinners, buzzy enough to forget birthdays, buzzy enough to miss anniversaries. But apparently, not too busy to share confidential business plans with his new assistant. Dinner finally ended. Emily began collecting the dishes. I'll help, Sophie offered. Oh, that's not necessary. I insist. Together, they carried plates into the kitchen. For a brief moment they stood alone. Sophie looked around the beautiful home. It's gorgeous. Thank you. You've lived here a long time. 20 years. Sophie smiled. It already feels. She paused. Comfortable. Emily found the choice of words unusual. Comfortable. As if Sophie already imagined herself belonging there. Before Emily could think further, David called from the living room. Sophie, would you grab the blue presentation folder upstairs? Emily froze. Upstairs? Sophie answered immediately. Of course. Without asking for directions, without hesitation, she walked straight toward the staircase. Emily stared after her. David remained seated in the living room, checking emails on his tablet as though nothing unusual had happened. Emily slowly followed. Halfway up the stairs, she watched Sophie turn left, not right. Left, exactly where the master bedroom was. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She had never told Sophie which room belonged to them. Neither had David. Yet Sophie walked with complete confidence. She reached the bedroom door, placed her hand on the handle, and opened it without the slightest hesitation. Emily stopped in the hallway. A cold feeling spread through her chest. How? Did she know which room was theirs? She hadn't asked. She hadn't looked around. She hadn't guessed. She simply knew. And in that silent hallway, with the bedroom door slowly swinging open, Emily felt, perhaps for the first time in 26 years, that a stranger had just walked into a place where only family belonged.